highly requested game in my arcade port series. This is Rainbow Islands, the story of Bubble Bobble 2. Yes, although this doesn't look or play like Bubble Bobble, this 1987 Taito release is a quintessential play which captures perfectly how fun games once were. A colourful and cutesy platformer where we control the bubble dragons in their human forms, who are known as Bubby and Bobby. Another change from Bubble Bobble is that rather than playing two players at once, we can now only play two-player games at alternate turns. The game itself is set up with 10 different islands, each containing 4 stages, and each one themed very differently. The aim is to work your way to the top of each stage and take down monsters using your rainbows. If you are too slow doing this, the rise in sea level will kill you. It's one of those games that most kids would have had a version of in the late 80s and even into the 2000s. So as always, we are going to rank from the worst to the most authentic looking home conversions of Rainbow Island to determine which system had the next best thing to the 1987 arcade release. I will note here that this is likely my biggest arcade ports video to date. Rainbow Islands truly had a staggering amount of versions and updated versions. Anyways, let's crack on. We are going to start with ranking the Game Boy Color's 2001 conversion by TDK Mediactive as the worst of the home ports. It goes about saying that the game just doesn't look wonderful. The colours are fairly washed out here, and for some unknown reason we actually have the original Bubble Bobble music on a constant loop. The game just doesn't translate too well for the Game Boy Color here. The controls are a little bit on the janky side too. Going back to the audio side of things, the sound effects here don't always work. Sometimes when I jumped, I heard the typical 8-bit jumping sound, whereas other times no sound at all. I also found that boss battles here were just far too easy. For example, if I remained in a corner and continued firing my rainbows, the boss wouldn't harm me at all. It's just not much fun at all, and the biggest deal breaker with this version is the sound problems, which totally destroys a whole Rainbow Islands experience. What can I say about the Sega Master System's Sega Enterprise's 1993 release? Well, it is pretty terrible really. It's certainly janky to play, plenty of sprite flickering and frame drops in its plenitude here. The stage design here isn't the greatest either. Oddly enough, most other versions fade the bosses in with the final stage of each island. Not here though. Sega Master System's port literally closes down the last stage before the boss stage and opens it back up to a new level entirely. It's pretty bad considering this was a very late release for the Sega Master System. Most coders with experience have mastered a particular platform to exploit the hardware to get the very best from it. This truly is poor though. Sprites look very scaled down compared with other versions, and the rainbows look really awful here too. The European release of this is also said to have a bug. When reaching a certain level in the game, it returns the player to the title screen, although the Brazilian version did fix that issue though. On a positive note, I would say that regardless of all its issues, the colour choice here is really nice. The American version of Rainbow Islands was published by Taito and released back in 1991. It is a much more polished version of the Sega Master System port, and so it does deviate a fair bit from the arcade game itself for that reason. The music is very different here, sprites are fairly small. Again, just like Sega Master System's version, we have a separate stage for the boss fights rather than including it on the final stage of each island as you gradually reach to the top. As a game, like I say, it's cleaned up well on the Nintendo NES, but can't rank it any higher as it just isn't the same as the arcade game. This is the other Nintendo NES version. This is the European release, which was published by Ocean in 1991. Although this is more faithful to emulating the arcades game, its music isn't right here. In fact, a totally different tune altogether. It's also very slow to play. For example, when reaching the top of stages for the treasure chest, it just seems like an eternity waiting for all the goodies to fly out. It does, however, have a really nice set of colours used in this version, and it also comes with a really nice introduction to the stages with the maps of the islands. There is a fair amount of sprite flicker here though, and it's mainly the rainbows which flicker the most, which can get a little bit frustrating. I am going to make this clear here that, good lord, Ocean pulled this game off perfectly with the ZX Spectrum conversion. Very likely one of Spectrum's best games of all time, in fact. I really hated ranking this port so low because it's just so impressive. But as always, I must remain practical and think about the aim of these ports videos. Although the game looks fantastic with its multiple colours used rather than just a couple of colours, it is still lacking a couple of things, such as no treasure chest at the end of the stages. And although it is impressive, the first boss was very pixelated. Very nitpicky, I know, but that's how it goes. It's a colourful 1989 release, and Spectrum owners got a superb game here for definite. It controls really well, and I will go as far to say that it's likely a technical achievement for the ZX Spectrum. I get a lot of watchers in this series who all pretty much say the same thing about how bad Amstrad arcade ports were. I will say here that miracles did happen for Sir Alan Sugar's 8-bit microcomputer. Rainbow Islands truly took me by surprise with the Amstrad CPC. It's actually nice to play something so nicely coded and fun to play on this platform. It's clearly a very colourful game which the CPC could do very well if left in the right hands. It controls nicely too, and those rainbows look really nice as you shoot them. Admittedly, it does slow down from time to time as well as the music itself, but it's still very playable, and it's nothing like the St. Dragon's Slugfest conversion which I covered the other day. Sprites are nicely sized, which gives the player enough gameplay area to maneuver without dying unnecessarily. Oddly enough, as we reach the top of the stages, the treasure chest is missing. But obviously this was too much for the CPC and so had to be sacrificed more than likely. Really though, this port released in 1989 by Ocean is superb. Finally, the Amstrad CPC kids had something to boast about back in the day. Now, if I am honest, this was a tough choice between the Amstrad CPC version and this Commodore 64 conversion, released also in 1989 by Ocean Software. Now, although this version isn't as colourful as Amstrad's version, this game is full screen as you can see. It does tend to slow down at certain points, such as a boss stage on the first island, but the music and sound effects don't suffer as a consequence. The C64 version does, however, shorten the game to 7 islands rather than its 10 in the arcades game, which is quite common for the micro conversions. Some are mixed over this version, some say it looks rough in comparison to the Amstrad's version, and some people have even gone so far as to say that it plays just as well as the Commodore Amiga's version. Like I say, a tough choice between these two systems. Another consideration which made me rank this one above the Amstrad is the fact that we get the iconic treasure chest drop down once we reach the top of the stages, as well as a colourful go in text which is more arcades like than the Amstrad's port. The Sega Mega Drive's exclusive Japanese release was entitled Rainbow Islands Extra. This one released by Taito in 1990. This is literally an update of the original arcades game. We have two modes here. We can select either Extra mode or Normal mode. If you're not familiar with the Extra mode, then the cute baddies have been replaced with robot and mech style enemies. I chose normal mode for this video. Now, as great as this port is, it suffers one simple thing that makes it look very different to the arcade game itself. Of course, the background is black, whereas the original game and most other ports are actually blue. It could have been the case that just by using a blue background, this might have conflicted or clashed with other colours used in the game. The gameplay itself is extremely tight. It sounds awesome with its rendition of Rainbow Islands music and sound effects. That goal in music once reaching the end of the stages also sounds perfect here. This game was originally supposed to get a release outside of Japan, but it never, which is a real shame. The sprites in this version are top notch and the colours which are used look fantastic too. 1996 saw the release of Bubble Bobble featuring Rainbow Islands, which was released for PlayStation, Sega Saturn and IBM PC compatible. Alongside Bubble Bobble, owners also had the chance to play the original Rainbow Islands game as well as an enhanced version. I am putting all three of these together as they are pretty much the same. I did notice, however, that the DOS version was slightly brighter than the other two versions. Although these are utterly faithful games, much like the arcades game, unfortunately these are let down by having a really bizarre version of the Rainbow Islands tune, and of course we are still looking for arcade perfection, or at least the closest to the arcades game as much as possible. Atari ST users got a superb conversion of Rainbow Islands by Ocean in 1990. Interestingly, Atari ST users were actually lucky to have this release at all due to licensing agreement issues with Taito. Graphical to develop this port didn't finish it at Taito's expected timescale, and so Taito seen it as the agreement was totally over with. So yes, it really was surprising that this game seen the light of day at all for the ST. So the Atari ST port has been seen as one of the platform's best arcade conversions. It is a good port with really nice rendition of the music too. The presentation here is also really quality looking, although I did find it slightly choppy to play compared to the next version in this video. The Commodore Amiga had a seriously exceptional release. I am almost going to say near arcade perfection, or as close to it as the Amiga could physically do at the time. The only thing that is different really is the colours. The blues, for example, with the Amiga releases lighter. This is just being nitpicky though. Why is this version so great? Well, you will notice this is not particularly suffering anything. The usual suspects are frame drops and sprite flickering, and that's why this is such a great version. Neither of those exist here. When you fall from heights in the game, it feels like there is some weight as you fall slowly. The music and sound effects are perfect here. Shooting rainbows also look really nice. This truly is a great and solid port that released in 1989 by Ocean. The developers were Graphical, who also developed the very awesome Fire and Ice game back in 1992, another classic game for the Amiga. I mentioned earlier that the PlayStation, Sega Saturn and DOS each had a version as a part of the Bubble Bobble feature and Rainbow Islands package. I couldn't include the enhanced versions in the main ranking as these obviously look different to what we are looking for. The enhanced versions are pretty much all the same across all three platforms. Obviously, the game had a makeover to give it more of a modern look for 1996 when they released. Personally, I'm not too keen on the enhanced look, but they had a fan base for sure. The FM Towns had a great conversion, but this only features the extra mode. This can't be included in the ranking as it just looks so much different, especially the sprites. If this is your first time seeing the extra version, then you will likely think the same as myself. The robots kind of look bizarre, and I really don't think it fits the style of the game personally. The game was released for Japan in 1988 by Romstar. The Nintendo DS had a version of Rainbow Islands known as Rainbow Islands Revolutions. For those who enjoyed Kirby and the Rainbow Curse for the Nintendo's Wii U, the mechanics of this version is very similar. Use a stylus to create rainbows and kill monsters. Unlike any other version, Bub rides around here in a bubble which is also controlled by the touchpad of the DS. In the PAL territories, Rising Star Games released this one in 2006. It's not overly a bad game as such, it is just obviously far too different from the arcade game itself. Although I am not great at this updated PSP Rainbow Islands Evolution game, which released in 2007 by Rising Star Games, it generally did have unfavourable reviews at the time of release. It felt janky to play, and by adding platforms in the background to give it a more 3D look, which the player could access, made this version a little bit of an oddball compared to anything else released in the Rainbow Islands franchise. And in first place, the PC Engine CD had a port of Rainbow Islands, which released by NEC Avenue back in 1993. Now this was an extreme close call of being on par with the Commodore Amiga's version. The thing is with this PC Engine CD version is that it just plays that slightly much smoother with clear music and sound effects. Obviously being on CD, it's going to sound superior to the Amiga game, in which it does sound much fresher here too. Something else that makes this version so much better is that the colours used here are much more accurate to the arcade game itself. The deeper blue colour used in the background, for example. The game scrolls extremely well with zero sprite flicker. The introduction to stages with the map is nicely done here too. This is a seriously faithful home conversion, and quite likely the next best thing you will find next to the arcade game itself. So anyways, that's it for ranking the various home ports of Rainbow Islands today. I did mention at the introduction part of the video that there was a lot to go through, and I think at this point you realise just to the extent how many versions of Rainbow Islands there is, and it's quite likely I'm missing a couple of other versions, but really I think at this point most people will think that's enough, I can't handle any more rainbows. Anyways, which version did you have growing up? As always, let us know in the comments. It's always good to hear feedback, and it's always nice to hear your own stories, how you once played these games. So anyways, until next video, thanks for watching.